The sun sat low and mean over the Montana hills that July afternoon, baking everything beneath it into submission. Dust hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody could put out. Caleb Mercer rode his horse slow along the fence line, checking posts that hadn't held water in weeks. His cattle were getting thin, the creek was down to a trickle, and every morning he woke up wondering if this would be the year the land finally beat him. He didn't expect to find the wagon. It sat crooked near the trail junction, one wheel sunk deep in a rut. The horse that had pulled it was gone. Probably wandered off looking for water or got stolen, didn't matter which. What mattered was the woman standing beside it, staring at nothing like she'd forgotten how to move. Caleb reined his horse to a stop about 20 yards out. He didn't call to her right away. He'd learned long ago that strangers in these parts usually meant trouble, and a lone woman out here with no horse and no help was trouble wearing a dress. She didn't look local. Her clothes were too clean, too Eastern. A traveling dress made for trains and hotel lobbies, not Montana dirt. Her hair was pinned up neat despite the heat, though a few strands had come loose and stuck to her neck. She held a carpet bag in one hand and a piece of paper in the other, and she was staring at that paper like it held the answer to some question she couldn't bring herself to ask. Caleb cleared his throat. "Ma'am." She flinched, turned. Her eyes found him, and for a second he saw something in them that made his chest tighten. Shame mixed with anger, mixed with exhaustion, so deep it looked like she might collapse right there. "I'm not lost," she said quickly, like she'd been rehearsing the line. Her voice had that clipped northeastern accent that always sounded strange out here. "I know exactly where I am." Caleb glanced at the wagon, at the empty horizon, at the paper still clutched in her hand. "That's so?" "Yes." "Where's your horse?" She hesitated. "Gone." "Gone where?" "I don't know. It was here this morning." Caleb shifted in his saddle. The woman looked like she wanted to cry but had decided against it out of pure stubbornness. He'd seen that look before, on men who'd lost everything in a bad winter and were too proud to admit it. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "No." "Then what are you doing out here?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her trying to decide whether to lie or tell the truth. Finally, she held up the paper. "I came here to get married," she said. Turns out the groom changed his mind. Caleb blinked. "Mail order?" "Yes." "And he just left you here?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "He didn't even have the decency to do it in person. Left a letter with the station master in town. Said he'd reconsidered, said he wished me well." She crumpled the paper in her fist. "Wished me well. Like I'm a business associate he's parting ways with." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He'd heard of mail-order brides before. Hell, half the married men in the territory had gotten their wives that way. But he'd never heard of one getting abandoned before the wedding even happened. "What's your name?" he asked. "Adeline Harper." "I'm Caleb Mercer. I own a ranch about 3 miles north of here." She nodded but didn't say anything, just stood there holding that crumpled letter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You got family back east?" Caleb asked. "No." "Friends?" "Not anymore." "Money?" She hesitated again, then shook her head. Caleb swore under his breath. This woman had come all the way out here with nothing and no one, betting everything on a man who didn't even have the spine to face her when he changed his mind. And now she was stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way home and no prospects. It wasn't his problem. He knew that. The smart thing would be to point her toward town, maybe give her a few dollars for a room, and ride away. He had enough trouble keeping his own ranch alive without taking on someone else's disaster. But when he opened his mouth to do exactly that, different words came out. "You can't stay here," he said. "Sun goes down, coyotes come out, and there's worse than coyotes in these hills." "I'm aware," she said stiffly. "Town's about 5 miles south. I can take you there if you want." She looked at him, then at the empty trail, then back at him. "And then what?" "Then you figure out what comes next. There's nothing in that town for me. I already went there." They laughed. Caleb felt something twist in his gut. Laughed? The station master read the letter out loud. Thought it was hilarious. By the time I left, half the town knew. Her voice cracked, just slightly. "So no, I'm not going back there." Caleb sat there on his horse, sweating in the heat, trying to figure out how this had become his responsibility. He didn't owe this woman anything. He'd never met her before in his life. And yet here she was, staring at him with that stubborn, broken look, and he couldn't just ride away. "All right," he said finally. "You can come with me." She blinked. "What?" "To my ranch. You can stay there until you figure out what you're doing." "I don't need charity." "Didn't say it was charity. I'm saying you can't stay out here, and you won't go to town, so that leaves my place, or nowhere." He met her eyes. "Your choice." Adeline stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her pride wrestling with her desperation. Finally, she picked up her carpet bag. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." Caleb climbed down from his horse and helped her load what little she had onto the saddle. The wagon wasn't worth saving. Whoever had sold it to her had seen her coming from a mile away. He'd have to come back later and strip it for parts. "You ever ridden a horse?" he asked. "No." "Then hold on tight." He swung up behind her and she went stiff as a board. Probably never been this close to a man who wasn't her father or a dance partner. Caleb tried to ignore the awkwardness and nudged the horse into a walk. They rode in silence for a while. The sun was starting to sink, turning the sky orange and pink. In a few hours, it would be cold. That's how it was out here. Burn all day, freeze all night. "Why are you helping me?" Adeline asked suddenly. Caleb didn't have a good answer. "Don't know. Seemed like the right thing to do. Most people wouldn't. Most people aren't me." She was quiet for a moment, then, "What will people say when you bring me home?" "Nothing worth listening to." "They'll think I'm your mistress." Caleb snorted. "They can think whatever they want, won't change the facts." "And what are the facts?" "That you needed help, and I gave it, that's all." Adeline didn't respond, but he felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The ranch came into view just as the last light was fading. It wasn't much. A small house, a barn that needed repair, a chicken coop, and a few acres of struggling crops. Caleb had built most of it himself over the past 8 years, and it showed. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted, just a place to survive. He helped Adeline down from the horse and led her inside. The house was sparse, one main room with a stove, a table, and a couple of chairs. A bedroom off to the side. No decorations, no softness. Just the bare minimum. "You can have the bedroom," Caleb said, setting her bag down. "I'll sleep out here." Adeline looked around, and he couldn't tell if she was disappointed or relieved. Probably both. "I'll earn my keep," she said. "I'm not going to sit around while you work. We'll figure that out tomorrow. Tonight, you should rest." She nodded, but she didn't move toward the bedroom. Just stood there in the middle of the room, looking lost. "You hungry?" Caleb asked. "I don't know." He went to the stove and started heating up some beans and salt pork. It wasn't much, but it was food. Adeline sat down at the table and watched him work, and he got the feeling she was trying to figure him out. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. 8 years. Alone. Mostly. "That must be hard." Caleb shrugged. "It's quiet." They ate in silence. Adeline picked at her food like she wasn't sure she wanted it, but eventually she cleaned her plate. Caleb figured she was hungrier than she'd let on. After dinner, he showed her where the water barrel was, where the outhouse was, and how to bar the door from the inside if she needed to. She thanked him in that polite, distant way people did when they didn't know what else to say. When she finally went into the bedroom and closed the door, Caleb sat down at the table and rubbed his face. What the hell had he just done? He'd brought a stranger into his home, a woman, no less, and now he was responsible for her. If word got out, and it would, people were going to talk. They'd assume the worst. They'd say he'd taken advantage of her. They'd say she was using him. They'd say 100 different things, none of them true. But what else was he supposed to do? Leave her out there to die? Caleb stretched out on the floor near the stove, using his saddle as a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, but he'd slept in worse places. Outside, he could hear the wind picking up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the woman sleeping in his bed. The next morning, Caleb woke to the smell of coffee. He sat up, confused. He hadn't made coffee. Hell, he barely drank the stuff anymore. Too expensive. But there it was, brewing on the stove, and Adeline was standing over it, fully dressed, her hair pinned up neat like she was about to attend church. "Morning," she said without looking at him. Caleb rubbed his eyes. You didn't have to do that. I told you I wouldn't be a burden. It's been one night. And I meant what I said. She poured him a cup and handed it to him. The coffee was strong, almost bitter, but it was hot and it woke him up. He watched her move around the kitchen, checking the shelves, opening the cupboards, taking inventory. You don't have much food, she observed. Haven't had time to go to town. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't beans or salt pork? Caleb thought about it. March, maybe? Adeline made a face. That's not sustainable. It's what I've got. She turned to look at him, hands on her hips. Do you have a garden? Tried. Didn't take. Why not? No water. Drought killed everything. What about the creek? It's drying up. Adeline frowned and Caleb could see her mind working. She was the kind of person who saw a problem and immediately started looking for solutions. He didn't know if that was admirable or exhausting. What do you need me to do? She asked. Nothing today. You should rest. I'm not tired. You just traveled across half the country and got abandoned by a stranger. You're tired. She bristled. Don't tell me how I feel. Caleb held up his hands. All right, fine. You want to work? We'll work. They spent the morning mending fences. Caleb showed her how to twist wire, how to brace the posts, how to check for weak spots. She didn't complain, even when the wire cut her hands. Didn't ask for breaks, even when the sun got brutal. Just kept working, grim and determined, like she had something to prove. By noon, they were both soaked in sweat. Caleb called it and led her back to the house. Adeline's hands were bleeding, and her dress was filthy, but she looked more alive than she had the day before. You did good, Caleb said, handing her a rag to clean her hands. I've done better. Out here? That counts as good. She smiled, just a little. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, and it changed her whole face. Made her look younger, less guarded. What did you do back east? Caleb asked. I worked in a shipping warehouse, kept records, managed inventory. That's how you know how to read maps and filings? Yes, I wasn't always this. She gestured at herself, at the dirty dress and bleeding hands. This isn't so bad. Isn't it? Caleb shrugged. You're alive. You're standing. That's more than a lot of people can say. Adeline looked at him, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or just a shared exhaustion. Then she turned away and started cleaning her hands. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Caleb would wake before dawn and start the day's work. Adeline would follow not long after, always dressed, always ready. She learned fast how to milk the cow, how to collect eggs, how to haul water from the creek. She didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. They communicated in gestures and glances, in the way people did when words felt like too much effort. At night, they'd eat together in silence, then retreat to their separate spaces. Caleb on the floor, Adeline in the bedroom. The house felt smaller with 2 people in it, but not in a bad way. Just different. On the 5th day, Caleb rode into town for supplies. He'd been dreading it, but there was no avoiding it. They needed flour, salt, nails, and a dozen other things he couldn't make or grow himself. The general store was crowded when he walked in, families stocking up for the week, ranchers trading gossip. And the moment Caleb stepped through the door, the room went quiet. He felt their eyes on him, heard the whispers. That's him. Heard he took her in. Poor fool. Caleb ignored them and walked up to the counter. The shopkeeper, a man named Dutch, gave him a long look. Heard you got yourself a house guest, Dutch said. Word travels fast. It does when you bring home a mail-order bride that isn't yours. Caleb's jaw tightened. She's not a house guest. She's just staying until she figures things out. Uh-huh. Dutch didn't sound convinced. People are talking, Mercer. Let them talk. They're saying she's trouble, saying she's using you. They don't know what they're talking about. Maybe not, but you might want to watch yourself. Woman like that, desperate and alone, she could cause problems. Caleb leaned across the counter. She's caused me 0 problems. You know what has caused me problems? This drought, these prices, and people sticking their noses where they don't belong. Dutch raised his hands. All right, I'm just saying. Caleb paid for his supplies and left. The whispers followed him out the door. When he got back to the ranch, Adeline was outside hanging laundry. She'd washed their clothes in the creek, wrung them out by hand, and strung them up on a line she'd rigged between two posts. It was a small thing, but it made the place look more lived in, more like a home. "How was town?" she asked. "Fine." She gave him a look. "Liar." Caleb sighed. "They're talking. About you. About us." "What are they saying?" "That you're using me. That I'm a fool." Adeline's expression hardened. "Do you believe them?" "No." "Good. Because I don't care what they think." "You sure about that?" She met his eyes. "I've been laughed at and pitied and judged since the moment I got here. If I cared what people thought, I'd be on a train back east by now." Caleb nodded slowly. "All right then." They worked the rest of the day without mentioning it again. But that night, as Caleb lay on the floor staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about what Dutch had said. Not because he believed it, but because he knew it was only the beginning. The gossip would get worse. The suspicion would grow. And eventually something was going to happen that neither of them could ignore. He just didn't know what. But 2 weeks passed. The drought got worse. The creek dried up completely, forcing Caleb to haul water from a spring 2 miles away. It took hours, and it still wasn't enough. The crops were dying. The cattle were thin. And every night, Caleb ran the numbers in his head, trying to figure out how much longer he could hold on. Adeline saw it, even though he didn't say anything. She started rationing food without being asked, started working longer hours, started pushing herself harder than anyone should. One afternoon, Caleb found her collapsed by the fence line. He'd been checking the north pasture when he saw her lying in the dirt, motionless. His heart stopped. He ran to her, dropped to his knees, turned her over. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, her eyes closed. "Adeline." He shook her gently. "Adeline, wake up." She groaned and relief flooded through him. "What happened?" he asked. "I'm fine," she mumbled. "You're not fine. You passed out. I just need a minute." Caleb scooped her up and carried her back to the house. She tried to protest, but she didn't have the strength. He laid her down on the bed and brought her water, made her drink, wouldn't let her get up until she'd finished the whole cup. "You're working yourself to death," he said. "I'm pulling my weight." "You're doing more than that. You're doing too much." She looked at him, and there was something desperate in her eyes. "I have to. If I don't, you'll send me away." Caleb stared at her. "Is that what you think?" "Why else would you keep me here?" "Because you need a place to stay." "For how long? A week? A month?" "Eventually you'll get tired of me, and I'll have to leave, and I'll have nowhere to go." Caleb sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm not going to send you away, Adeline." "You say that now." "I mean it." She looked at him like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't quite manage it. "You don't owe me anything," Caleb said quietly. "You don't have to kill yourself to stay here. You're not a burden. You're—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "I'm what?" she asked. "You're helping me," he said finally. "More than you know." Adeline's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall, just nodded and looked away. "Rest," Caleb said. "I'll handle things today." "Caleb?" "Rest." She didn't argue. Caleb went back outside and finished the work alone, but the whole time he couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said, about how scared she was of being sent away, about how hard she was pushing herself just to feel like she belonged. He didn't know how to tell her that she already did. Mamig. The trouble started on a Wednesday. Caleb had gone into town again, this time to talk to the bank about extending his loan. The drought had hit everyone hard, and a lot of ranchers were behind on payments. He was hoping the bank would cut him some slack. They didn't. "We can give you 2 more months, the banker said. "After that, we're calling it in. 2 months isn't enough. It's what we can offer." Caleb left the bank feeling like the ground was falling out from under him. 2 months. That was it. If he couldn't turn things around by then, he'd lose everything. He was halfway back to his horse when he heard voices in the alley beside the saloon. "Saw her yesterday, washing clothes down by the creek. She's still there?" "Seems like it." "Mercer's a damn fool." Caleb stopped. The voices were coming from 2 men he didn't recognize, rough-looking types, probably drifters passing through. "Heard she's real pretty," one of them said. "Pretty and desperate. That's a good combination." They laughed, and Caleb's hands curled into fists. Think Mercer's keeping her for himself? The first man asked. If he's smart, but I doubt it. Man like that, living alone all these years, he probably don't even know what to do with a woman. Maybe we should pay her a visit, see if she's interested in some company. The second man laughed. Hell, why not? Caleb stepped into the alley. Both men looked up, startled. You talking about Adeline Harper? Caleb asked, his voice low and dangerous. The first man smirked. Maybe. What's it to you? She's under my protection. That means you stay away from her. Your protection? The man snorted. You her husband? Doesn't matter. Sounds like it does. Caleb took a step forward. I'm only going to say this once. Stay away from my ranch. Stay away from her. If I see either of you anywhere near my property, you'll regret it. The second man stood up, trying to look tough. You threatening us? I'm making a promise. For a moment, the three of them just stared at each other. Then the first man spat on the ground and laughed. Relax, friend. We were just talking. Then talk about something else. Caleb turned and walked away, his heart pounding. He didn't look back, didn't wait to see if they followed, just got on his horse and rode. When he got home, Adeline was in the garden, trying to coax life out of plants that were already half dead. She looked up when she heard him approach, and her smile faded when she saw his face. What happened? She asked. Nothing. Caleb. He dismounted and walked over to her. There were some men in town talking about you. Her expression went cold. What did they say? Doesn't matter. I handled it. How? I told them to stay away. Adeline stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. And you think that'll work? It better. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the fear behind her eyes. Fear that had nothing to do with the drought or the ranch or the gossip. Fear that came from knowing what men could do when they decided a woman was fair game. I won't let anything happen to you, Caleb said. You can't promise that. I just did. Adeline shook her head. You don't understand. Men like that, they don't care about promises. They take what they want. Then I'll stop them. How? You're one man. I'll find a way. She stared at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something other than stubbornness in her eyes. He saw trust, fragile and uncertain, but there. All right, she said softly. I believe you. Caleb nodded, even though he wasn't sure he believed himself. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Adeline must have known, because she didn't close the bedroom door all the way, just left it cracked, like she wanted to make sure he was still there. Nothing happened. No one came. But Caleb stayed awake anyway, because the world was full of men who thought they could take whatever they wanted, and he'd be damned if he let them take her. The days after that were tense. Caleb kept his rifle close and his eyes open. Adeline didn't ask questions, but he could see her watching him, measuring his worry, trying to figure out how bad things really were. Work continued. The ranch didn't stop needing attention just because there was trouble brewing. They hauled water, mended fences, tried to keep the animals alive, but there was a new edge to everything now, a sense that they were running out of time. One evening, as they sat at the table eating another meal of beans and stale bread, Adeline spoke up. I've been thinking, she said. About what? About the ranch. About the drought. Caleb set down his fork. What about it? You said the creek dried up, but there's got to be water somewhere. Underground, maybe. Underground water costs money to reach. Money I don't have. What if you didn't need to dig a well? What if there was another source? Caleb frowned. Like what? I don't know yet, but I've been looking at the land, the way the hills slope, the places where plants are still alive. There's a pattern. Water's going somewhere. You think you can find it? I think I can try. Caleb studied her. She was serious. And more than that, she was smart. Smarter than most people gave her credit for. If she said there was a pattern, there probably was. All right, he said, show me. The next morning, they walked the property together. Adeline pointed out things he'd never noticed. The way certain trees grew taller in one area, the places where the soil stayed darker longer after rain, the slight dips in the land that might channel runoff. She didn't have all the answers, but she was asking the right questions. By midday, they'd narrowed it down to 3 possible spots. "We'll start digging tomorrow," Caleb said. "Not you. Us." "Adeline, don't even start. I'm doing this." He didn't argue. They dug for 3 days straight. The first spot yielded nothing. The second spot gave them damp soil but no water. On the third spot, about 40 feet from the house, they hit mud. Then wet mud. Then, finally, water. It wasn't much, just a slow trickle seeping up from the ground. But it was enough. Enough to keep the animals alive. Enough to save the garden. Enough to give them a chance. Caleb stared at the water pooling in the bottom of the hole, and he felt something break open inside him. Relief. Gratitude. Hope. He looked at Adeline. She was covered in dirt, her hair falling out of its pins, her hands raw from digging, and she was smiling. "We did it," she said. "You did it." "We did it," she insisted, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt like he wasn't alone. Patseg. News of the water spread. Within a week, half the ranchers in the valley had heard about it. Some were impressed. Some were suspicious. And some, like the land speculator who showed up unannounced on Caleb's doorstep 2 weeks later, saw it as an opportunity. His name was Raymond Voss, and he arrived in a fancy carriage with 2 armed men at his side. Caleb met him outside, rifle in hand, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Mr. Mercer," Voss said, tipping his hat. "Mind if we talk? Depends on what you want to talk about." "Your land." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "My land's not for sale." "I haven't made an offer yet." "Doesn't matter. It's not for sale." Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. You see, I've been doing some research. Turns out this property sits on a disputed boundary. Part of it might not actually belong to you." Caleb went very still. "That's a lie." "Is it? I have documents that suggest otherwise." "Then your documents are wrong." Voss pulled a rolled-up paper from his coat and held it out. "Take a look for yourself." Caleb didn't move. Behind him, he heard the door open. Adeline stepped outside, and Voss's gaze shifted to her. "Ah," Voss said. "You must be Miss Harper. I've heard about you." "Have you?" Adeline said flatly. "Indeed, quite the scandal, your situation." He smiled. "But I'm not here to gossip. I'm here to make a business proposition." "We're not interested," Caleb said. "You haven't heard it yet." "Don't need to." Voss's smile faded. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Mercer. I'm trying to help you." "By stealing my land?" "By offering you a fair price for property you might not legally own. If you cooperate, this can be smooth. If you don't—" He shrugged. "Well, things could get complicated." Caleb took a step forward. "Get off my property." Voss didn't move. "Think carefully about what you're doing. I have powerful friends. You have a struggling ranch and a woman who doesn't belong to you. Who do you think wins that fight?" Before Caleb could respond, Adeline spoke up. "Show me the documents," she said. Voss blinked. "Excuse me?" "The documents you say prove the boundaries disputed. Show me." "I don't think—" "Show me." Something in her tone made Voss hesitate. Finally, he handed over the rolled paper. Adeline unrolled it, studied it for a long moment, then looked up at Voss. "This is a forgery," she said. Voss's expression went cold. "Careful what you accuse me of, Miss Harper. The seal's wrong. The date doesn't match the filing number. And the signature," she pointed at the bottom of the page, "doesn't match the county clerk's actual signature. I've seen enough shipping manifests to know a fake when I see one." Caleb stared at her. Voss stared at her. Even Voss's men looked uncertain. "You don't know what you're talking about," Voss said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. "Don't I?" Adeline handed the paper back. "Take your forgery and get out." Voss's face flushed red. For a moment, Caleb thought he might try something, but then Voss jerked his head at his men, and they climbed back into the carriage. "This isn't over," Voss said. "Yes, it is," Adeline replied. They watched the carriage roll away. When it was out of sight, Caleb turned to Adeline. "How did you know?" he asked. "I told you. I worked in shipping. Forged documents aren't that uncommon. You learn to spot them." "You just made an enemy." "I think we already had one." Caleb nodded slowly. She was right. Voss had come here planning to take his land, and Adeline had just thrown a wrench into his plans. That meant Voss would come back. and next time he wouldn't be so polite. "We need to be ready," Caleb said. "I know." They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd barely known each other a month ago, bound together now by something neither of them had asked for but couldn't walk away from. And in that moment, Caleb realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. He didn't want her to leave. Not now. Not ever. But he didn't say it. Not yet. Because there were bigger problems coming, and they both knew it. The storm was just beginning. That night, sleep didn't come easy for either of them. Caleb lay on the floor near the stove, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, his mind turning over everything Voss had said. A man like that didn't make threats he couldn't back up, which meant he had something planned, something worse than showing up with forged documents and a smug smile. Around midnight, Caleb heard movement from the bedroom. Footsteps. The creak of the door. He sat up and saw Adeline standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale in the moonlight coming through the window. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No." She came into the main room and sat down at the table. "I keep thinking about what he said, about his powerful friends. He was trying to scare you. He succeeded." She looked at him. "What if he comes back with more men? What if he brings the law?" "The law won't help him if his documents are fake. But what if he makes new ones? Better ones?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Caleb, I've seen how this works. Men like Voss don't lose. They just keep pushing until they get what they want." Caleb stood up and walked over to the table. He sat down across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other in the dim light. "I've been holding on to this land for 8 years, he said quietly. "Fought droughts, fought winters that killed half my herd, fought loneliness that damn near broke me, and I'm still here. You know why?" She shook her head. "Because I'm too stubborn to quit. And now I've got something else." He met her eyes. "I've got someone worth fighting for." Adeline's breath caught. "Caleb, I'm not letting him take this place, and I'm not letting him hurt you. Whatever it takes." She stared at him, and he could see her trying to decide whether to believe him. Finally, she nodded. "Then we need a plan," she said, "because stubbornness isn't going to be enough." "What do you have in mind?" Adeline pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Voss said he has powerful friends. We need to find out who they are. If we know who's backing him, we can figure out what they really want." "How do we do that?" "We start asking questions. In town. At the land office. Someone knows something." She paused. "And we need to get our own documents in order. Proof that this land is yours. Legal proof that can't be disputed." Caleb nodded slowly. "That means going back to town. Multiple times." "I know. People are already talking about us. This is going to make it worse." "Let them talk." Adeline's jaw tightened. "I'm tired of caring what people think." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd shown up broken and desperate a month ago was now sitting across from him, plotting strategy like a general preparing for war. She'd changed. Or maybe she'd always been this way, and it had just taken the frontier to bring it out of her. "All right," he said, "we do it your way. But you stay close to me when we're in town. No wandering off alone." "I can take care of myself." "I know you can, but I'm asking anyway." Adeline looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just said, "Fine." They sat there a while longer, not talking, just being in each other's presence. Eventually, Adeline stood up and went back to the bedroom. This time, she left the door open completely. Caleb took that as a sign, not of anything romantic, but of trust. She felt safer knowing he was right there. He lay back down on the floor and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, they'd start fighting back. Tonight, he'd let himself rest. The morning came too fast. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee again. Adeline had made it a habit now, rationing their small supply, so they each got a cup every morning. It was a small luxury, but it made the days feel less brutal. They ate a quick breakfast, then saddled the horse. The ride into town took about an hour, and neither of them spoke much. Caleb could feel the tension radiating off Adeline. She was scared, he realized. Not of Voss exactly, but of what might happen if they failed. The town was busier than usual when they arrived. Market day. Farmers and ranchers from all over the valley had come to trade goods, and the main street was packed with wagons and people. Caleb tied his horse outside the land office and helped Adeline down. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Inside, the land office was cramped and stuffy. Shelves lined the walls, packed with ledgers and rolled documents. Behind a desk sat a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, sorting through papers with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd been doing the same job for 20 years. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I need to confirm the boundaries on my property," Caleb said. "Ranch 3 miles north of here, Mercer Homestead." The clerk glanced up, recognized Caleb, then his eyes slid to Adeline. His expression shifted, not quite disapproving, but close. "Miss Harper," he said, "didn't expect to see you again." "I'm sure you didn't," Adeline replied coolly. The clerk turned back to Caleb. "What's the concern?" "Someone's claiming my boundaries are disputed. I want to see the original survey." "That'll take time to pull." "We'll wait." The clerk sighed, stood up, and disappeared into the back room. Caleb and Adeline stood there in the dusty office, listening to the sounds of the market outside. After about 10 minutes, the clerk returned carrying a large rolled document. "Here," he said, spreading it across the desk. "Original survey from 1872. Your land's marked right here." Caleb leaned over the map. His property lines were clearly drawn, matching exactly what he remembered from when he'd purchased the place. No disputes, no ambiguity. "Can I get a certified copy of this?" Caleb asked. The clerk frowned. "That costs money." "How much?" $3. Caleb winced. $3 was a lot, especially with the bank breathing down his neck. But it was necessary. "I'll pay it," Adeline said suddenly. Both men looked at her. "I have some money saved," she continued, pulling a small purse from her pocket. "Not much, but enough for this." "Adeline, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She counted out 3 silver dollars and placed them on the desk. "We need this." The clerk took the money, made a note in his ledger, and said, "Come back tomorrow. I'll have it ready." They left the office and stepped back into the sunlight. The market was even more crowded now, and Caleb could feel people watching them, whispering. He'd expected it, but it still grated on him. "Where did you get that money?" he asked as they walked toward the general store. "I've been doing mending for some of the ranch wives. They pay a little. Not much, but I've been saving it." Caleb stopped walking. "You've been taking in mending work?" "Someone has to bring in extra money." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have told me not to do it." She was right. He would have. "Adeline, don't." She turned to face him. "Don't tell me I shouldn't be working. Don't tell me I should rely on you for everything. I need to contribute. I need to feel like I'm not just taking up space." Caleb wanted to argue, but he couldn't. He understood that feeling too well. The need to prove your worth, to justify your existence. He'd felt it every day since his father died and left him with nothing but a piece of land and a dream that seemed impossible. "All right," he said, "but you don't have to do it alone. We're in this together." Adeline's expression softened. "I know." They continued through the market, and Caleb noticed something. People were staring, yes, but not all of them with disapproval. Some of the women nodded at Adeline. A few men tipped their hats. It was subtle, but it was there. A shift in the town's attitude. Maybe word had gotten around about how hard she worked. Or maybe they'd just gotten used to seeing her. They reached the general store and Caleb pushed open the door. Dutch was behind the counter again and his face went carefully neutral when he saw them. "Mercer, Miss Harper." "Dutch," Caleb said. "Need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "You know anything about Raymond Voss?" Dutch's expression flickered. "Why?" "He came to my ranch yesterday. Tried to claim my lands on disputed territory." "That's so." Dutch leaned against the counter. "Can't say I'm surprised. Voss has been sniffing around a lot of properties lately, making offers, pressuring folks." "Who's backing him?" Dutch hesitated. "Don't know for sure, but there's talk he's working with some railroad investors from back east. They want land for a new line coming through the territory." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "Railroad?" "That's the rumor. They're buying up property cheap, forcing people out if they have to." Dutch glanced at Adeline. "If Voss is after your place, it means the railroad wants it." "But my ranch isn't near any planned rail lines," Caleb said. "Maybe not yet, but plans change. Routes get adjusted. And if enough people sell, they can reroute wherever they want." Adeline spoke up. "How many ranchers has Voss approached?" "At least a dozen that I know of. Some sold, others are holding out." Dutch's expression darkened. But the ones holding out, let's just say Voss knows how to make life difficult. How? Caleb asked. Cattle go missing, fences get cut, barns catch fire. Dutch shrugged. Can't prove it's him, but the pattern's pretty clear. Caleb's hands curled into fists. He's running people off their land. That's what it looks like. And the law won't do anything? The sheriff's in Voss's pocket. Or scared of him. Either way, you won't get help there. Caleb looked at Adeline. She looked back at him, and he could see the same thought running through both their minds. They were on their own. Thanks for the information, Caleb said. Dutch nodded. Watch yourself, Mercer. Voss doesn't play fair. They left the store and walked back toward the horse. The market was still bustling around them, but Caleb barely noticed. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how to fight an enemy with that much power and money behind him. We need to talk to the other ranchers, Adeline said. The ones who are still holding out. If we work together, we're stronger. That's a big if. Most of these folks don't trust each other. Getting them to cooperate won't be easy. Then we make it easy. We show them the evidence. We prove Voss is lying. The documents won't be ready until tomorrow. Then we wait until tomorrow. Adeline looked at him. But we don't wait sitting still. We spend today finding out who else Voss has targeted. We start building a case. Caleb studied her. She was thinking 3 steps ahead, planning like someone who'd spent years managing complex logistics. He'd underestimated her when they first met. He wouldn't make that mistake again. All right, he said. Let's start with the Hendersons. Their ranch borders mine on the west side. They rode out to the Henderson place, a sprawling ranch with twice the land Caleb had. Jim Henderson was a gruff man in his 50s, weathered by decades of hard work and harder winters. He met them at the door with a suspicious look. Mercer, he said, what brings you out here? Need to talk to you about Raymond Voss, Pete. Henderson's expression darkened. That bastard came here last week. Tried to buy me out for pennies on the dollar. What did you tell him? Told him to go to hell. Good. He came to my place too. Showed up with forged documents claiming my land's disputed. Henderson swore. Same thing he did to the Morrisons. They folded, sold for half what the place was worth. Did Voss threaten you? Adeline asked. Henderson glanced at her, seemed to reassess, then nodded. Not directly, but his men made it clear what would happen if I didn't sell. Found 3 of my cows dead in the north pasture 2 days later, poisoned. Caleb felt rage building in his chest. You report it? To who? The sheriff won't do anything. Then we handle it ourselves, Caleb said. But we can't do it alone. We need the other ranchers. Everyone Voss has targeted. Henderson crossed his arms. What are you proposing? A meeting. Everyone who's holding out against Voss. We share information, coordinate, maybe even hire our own lawyer if we pool resources. That costs money none of us have. Then we find another way. But we can't keep fighting separately. He's picking us off one by one. Henderson looked skeptical. And what makes you think people will show up? Half the valley doesn't trust the other half. Because they're scared, Adeline said. And scared people will do things they wouldn't normally do, including working with neighbors they don't like. Henderson studied her for a long moment. You're that mail-order bride, aren't you? The one who got left. I am. Heard you've been working Mercer's ranch pretty hard. I do what needs doing. Henderson nodded slowly. All right, I'll spread the word. We'll meet at my place in 3 days, Saturday evening, but I'm not promising anyone will come. That's all we're asking, Caleb said. They shook hands, and Caleb and Adeline rode back toward home. The sun was starting to sink, painting the hills orange and red. It should have been beautiful, but all Caleb could think about was the fight ahead. You think anyone will actually show up? He asked. Some will, Adeline said. The ones who are desperate enough. That's not exactly reassuring. It's realistic. She glanced at him. You said it yourself. Stubbornness isn't enough. We need strategy. And the first part of strategy is knowing who your allies are. Caleb couldn't argue with that. When they got back to the ranch, the sun had fully set. They took care of the horse, checked on the animals, and went inside. Adeline started making dinner while Caleb cleaned his rifle. It had become their routine, her cooking, him preparing for whatever might come through the door. Do you think he'll come back? Adeline asked. Voss? Eventually. When? When he thinks we're vulnerable. or when he's ready to escalate. Adeline stirred the pot on the stove, her movements mechanical. "I'm scared, Caleb." He looked up. She'd never admitted that before, not directly. "Me too," he said. She turned to face him. "Really?" "Yeah, I'd be stupid not to be." He set the rifle down. "But being scared doesn't mean we stop fighting." "I know, it's just—" She trailed off, struggling with the words. "I thought I was done running. I thought coming here would be the end of it, but now I'm in another fight, and I don't know if I have the strength for it." Caleb stood up and walked over to her. He wanted to touch her, to offer some kind of physical comfort, but he didn't know if that would be welcome. So he just stood there, close enough that she could feel his presence. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "You've proven that every day since you got here." "Have I?" "You found water when I couldn't. You spotted Voss's forgery when I would have missed it. You're the one who came up with this plan to organize the ranchers." He paused. "I couldn't do this without you, Adeline." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me hope. And hope is dangerous. Hope is all we've got." She looked at him, and for a moment the distance between them felt like nothing. He could have kissed her right then, could have pulled her close and let everything else fall away. But he didn't, because this wasn't the right time, and she wasn't ready, and neither was he. Instead, he just said, "Let's eat. We've got a long few days ahead." They ate in silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. After dinner, Adeline cleaned up while Caleb checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. When he came back inside, she was sitting at the table writing something on a piece of paper. "What's that?" he asked. "A list. Everyone we need to talk to before Saturday, and what we need to say to convince them to come." Caleb sat down and looked at the list. She'd written down names, locations, possible objections, and counterarguments for each one. It was thorough, organized, the work of someone who knew how to manage complex situations. "Where'd you learn to do this?" he asked. "The warehouse. We had to coordinate shipments between multiple companies, deal with suppliers who didn't trust each other, solve problems that seemed impossible." She smiled faintly. "This isn't that different, except the stakes are higher." "Are they? Back there, if I made a mistake, people lost money, lost jobs, lost their livelihoods." She met his eyes. "Out here, the stakes feel more direct, but the principle's the same. You identify the problem, gather your resources, and execute the plan." Caleb shook his head in wonder. "You're something else, you know that?" "I'm practical. There's a difference." "No, you're brilliant, and I'm lucky you ended up here." Adeline looked away, and he could see her struggling with the compliment. She didn't know how to accept praise. Probably spent most of her life being told she wasn't good enough, wasn't pretty enough, wasn't worth the effort. And now here she was, proving all of that wrong. "We should get some rest," she said, standing up. "Tomorrow's going to be busy." "Yeah." She went to the bedroom, and this time she closed the door most of the way. Not all the way, just enough to have privacy but still feel connected. Caleb lay down on the floor and stared at the ceiling. He was falling for her. He'd been trying not to admit it, but there it was. Somewhere between the first day when he'd found her by that abandoned wagon, and now he'd started caring about her in a way that went beyond simple kindness or responsibility. He cared about her opinions, her safety, her happiness. And that terrified him, because the last time he'd let himself care about someone, really care, he'd lost them. His mother, dead from fever when he was 12. His father, crushed by a falling tree 5 years later. His younger brother, drowned in a river crossing they never should have attempted. Everyone he loved had been taken from him, and he'd learned to keep his distance after that, to not get attached. But Adeline had slipped past his defenses without him even realizing it. And now, with Voss threatening everything they'd built, the thought of losing her felt unbearable. Caleb closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, they'd continue the fight. Tonight, he'd let himself imagine a future where they won. The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Caleb and Adeline rode from ranch to ranch, talking to anyone who would listen. Some people were receptive. Others slammed doors in their faces. A few were openly hostile, accusing Caleb of stirring up trouble just because he couldn't handle his own problems. But slowly, word spread. And by Friday evening, they had commitments from 8 ranchers to attend the meeting at Henderson's place. "8's not enough," Caleb said as they rode home that night. It's a start, Adeline replied. And once they see we're serious, others might join. Or they'll think we're fools and keep their distance. Then we'll be fools together. Caleb looked at her, and despite everything, he smiled. I can live with that. They got back to the ranch just as night was falling. Caleb took care of the horse, while Adeline went inside to start dinner. But when he walked into the house a few minutes later, she was standing frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the table. What's wrong? He asked. She pointed. On the table sat a dead crow. Its neck had been broken, and someone had arranged it carefully, wings spread out like a warning. Caleb's blood ran cold. When did you... Oh. Just now. It wasn't here when we left this morning. Someone had been in their house, had walked through their door, left this message, and walked out. Caleb grabbed his rifle and checked every room, every corner, but whoever had done it was long gone. It's Voss, Adeline said, her voice shaking. He's trying to scare us. It's working. What do we do? Caleb looked at the dead bird, then at Adeline. We don't let him see that he got to us. We clean this up, we lock everything down, and we keep going. Just like that? Just like that. But his hands were shaking as he picked up the crow and carried it outside. This was a new level of threat. Voss wasn't just pressuring them anymore. He was making it personal. That night, Caleb didn't sleep at all. He sat by the window with his rifle, watching the darkness, waiting for movement that never came. Adeline didn't sleep either. He could hear her shifting restlessly in the bedroom, and once, he thought he heard her crying. When morning came, they were both exhausted. But they got up, went through their routine, and prepared for the meeting at Henderson's place, because stopping now would mean Voss had won, and neither of them was willing to accept that. The ride to Henderson's ranch took longer than usual. Caleb kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see Voss or his men following them. But the trail stayed empty. When they arrived, there were already several wagons and horses outside. Henderson met them at the door. 12 people showed up, he said, more than I expected. Inside the main room was packed, ranchers and their wives, all of them looking grim and tired. Some Caleb recognized, others he'd never met. But they all had one thing in common. They were scared. Henderson called the meeting to order, and Caleb stood up to speak. Thanks for coming, he said. I know most of you don't know me, and I know some of you probably think this is a waste of time, but we're all facing the same problem. Raymond Voss is trying to run us off our land. He came to my place 2 weeks ago, one man said. Offered me half what the ranch is worth. Same here, a woman added, and when I said no, my well got poisoned. My barn burned down, someone else said. Can't prove it was him, but the timing's suspicious. One by one, people shared their stories, and as they did, Caleb saw the fear in the room shift into something else. Anger, determination. So what do we do about it? A man in the back asked. Adeline stood up. We prove he's lying. We get our documents in order, we share information, and we make it clear that we're not going to roll over. That's easy to say when you're not the one losing cattle, someone muttered. I almost died in the wilderness because a man lied to me, Adeline shot back. I rebuilt my life from nothing on land I don't even own, so don't tell me I don't understand loss. The room went quiet. The point is, Adeline continued, Voss wins when we're divided, when we're scared, when we think we're alone. But we're not alone. There are 12 of us in this room right now, 12 families who can watch each other's backs, share resources, and stand together. And if that's not enough, someone asked, then we find more people. We keep fighting. We don't give up. She looked around the room, because if we give up, we lose everything. And I don't know about you, but I'm done losing. There was a long silence. Then Henderson stood up. I'm in, he said. Whatever it takes. One by one, others stood up. Not everyone, but enough. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. They'd document everything, every threat, every suspicious incident, every interaction with Voss. They'd pool money to hire a surveyor to verify property lines. And they'd establish a rotation to keep watch on each other's ranches, making it harder for Voss to strike. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. As people filed out, several came up to thank Adeline personally. One woman hugged her. A man shook her hand and said, You're braver than most of us. Caleb watched it all, feeling a strange mix of pride and protectiveness. She'd won them over, not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it, with conviction, with fire. On the ride home, Adeline was quiet. Caleb let her be. She'd spent the evening being strong for everyone else. She deserved a moment to just feel whatever she was feeling. But as they approached the ranch, she finally spoke. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked. "I don't know, but it's better than doing nothing." "What if Voss escalates? Then we deal with it. What if someone gets hurt?" Caleb pulled the horse to a stop and turned to look at her. "Then we deal with that too. But we don't quit. We don't back down. Because if we do, he wins, and I'm not letting him win." Adeline nodded, and they continued toward home. But as they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, Caleb's heart stopped. Smoke. Black smoke rising from the direction of their property. He kicked the horse into a gallop, Adeline holding on tight behind him. They raced down the hill, and as they got closer, Caleb saw what was burning. The barn. Flames engulfed the entire structure, sending smoke and sparks into the night sky. The animals were out. Someone must have let them loose before setting the fire. But the building itself was lost. Caleb jumped off the horse and ran toward the blaze, but the heat drove him back. There was nothing he could do. Nothing but watch as months of work and materials burned to the ground. Adeline stood beside him, her face illuminated by the flames. "He did this," she said quietly. "Voss." "Yeah. While we were at the meeting, he knew we'd be gone." Caleb nodded. His barn, his supplies, his feed for the animals, all gone. And in the dirt near the barn's entrance, someone had left a note weighted down with a rock. Caleb picked it up and read it by the light of the fire. "Last warning, sell or it gets worse." He crumpled the note in his fist, rage coursing through him like fire. Voss thought he could break them, thought he could terrorize them into submission. He was wrong. Caleb turned to Adeline. "Go inside. Lock the door. I'll stay out here and make sure the fire doesn't spread." "I'm not leaving you alone." "Adeline, I said I'm not leaving you." He looked at her, and in the flickering firelight he saw the same stubborn determination that had kept her alive through everything else. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to break. And neither was he. Together, they watched the barn burn. And when the flames finally died down to embers in the early hours of morning, they stood there in the ashes and made a silent promise. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sun came up over the blackened remains of the barn, and with it came Henderson and 4 other ranchers from the meeting. They'd seen the smoke from miles away and rode through the night to get there. Nobody said much at first, just stood around looking at the wreckage, their faces tight with anger and something close to fear. "Voss did this," Henderson said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Caleb replied. His voice was raw from smoke and exhaustion. "While we were all at my place." "That's right." One of the other ranchers, a man named Tucker, spat into the dirt. "Son of a bitch is making his point clear." "What point?" Adeline asked. She'd been silent all morning, standing near the ruins with her arms wrapped around herself. "That he can destroy whatever he wants, whenever he wants?" "That we're vulnerable," Henderson said. "That organizing against him makes things worse, not better." "So what do we do?" Tucker asked. "Back down?" "Hell no," Henderson said, but he didn't sound as certain as he had the night before. Caleb looked at the burned barn, at the scattered tools and charred wood that represented months of work. He'd built that barn himself, board by board, and now it was ash. He should have felt defeated, should have felt like maybe Voss was right and this fight was pointless, but all he felt was rage. "We keep going," he said. Everyone turned to look at him. "Voss wants us scared. He wants us to think that standing together makes us targets. But we were targets anyway. At least now we're not facing him alone." "Easy for you to say," Tucker muttered. "You already lost your barn. What's he going to burn down next? Your house? Your crops?" "Maybe," Caleb said, "but at least I'll know I didn't hand it to him without a fight." Tucker looked like he wanted to argue, but Henderson cut him off. "Mercer's right. We knew this would get ugly. Backing down now just proves Voss can intimidate us into anything." "Fine," Tucker said. "But what's the actual plan? We can't just wait around for him to pick us off one by one." Adeline spoke up then, her voice quiet but steady. "We make him face all of us at once." "What do you mean?" Henderson asked. "Voss operates in the shadows. Threats, sabotage, pressure from a distance. But what if we forced him into the open? Made him defend his claims publicly where everyone could see? How? There's a town meeting in 2 weeks. Everyone in the valley attends. Merchants, ranchers, even the territorial governor's representatives sometimes. If we present our evidence there, Voss can't hide behind his hired men. Tucker shook his head. The sheriff won't let you speak. He's on Voss's payroll. Then we don't ask permission, Adeline said. We just do it. That's a good way to get thrown out, or worse. Maybe. But it's also the only way to get the whole valley's attention at once. Adeline looked around at the men. Right now, people think this is a problem between Voss and a few stubborn ranchers. If we show them it's bigger than that Voss is using forged documents and intimidation to steal land from half the territory, they'll have to pay attention. Henderson scratched his jaw. It's risky. Everything's risky at this point, Caleb said, but she's right. We need to stop playing defense and start pushing back. The ranchers looked at each other, weighing their options. Finally, Henderson nodded. All right, we'll gather every piece of evidence we can. Property records, witness statements, anything that proves Voss is lying. And in 2 weeks, we'll take it to the town meeting. And if the sheriff tries to stop us, Tucker asked, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Henderson said. The men helped Caleb clear away some of the debris from the barn and salvage what little could be saved. It wasn't much. A few tools, some undamaged lumber, a saddle that had been hanging far enough from the flames to survive. But it was something. By midday, the ranchers had left, promising to spread the word and start collecting evidence. Caleb and Adeline were alone again, standing in the ruins of what they'd been trying to build. Are you all right? Adeline asked. Caleb let out a bitter laugh. No, but I'll manage. We can rebuild. With what? I don't have money for new lumber. The bank's already breathing down my neck, and now I've lost half my supplies. Then we'll figure something else out. Like what? Adeline didn't have an answer. She just stood there looking at the wreckage, her face streaked with soot and exhaustion. Caleb felt guilt twist in his gut. This was his fight, his land, his problem, and he dragged her into it. She could have left weeks ago, should have left, but instead she'd stayed and fought beside him. And now she was standing in the ashes of his barn, trying to figure out how to fix something that might not be fixable. You should go, he said quietly. She turned to look at him. What? Leave. Go back east, or find somewhere else, somewhere safe. Are you serious right now? This is only going to get worse. Voss isn't going to stop until I'm gone or dead. And I don't want you caught in the middle of it. Adeline's expression went from shocked to furious in about 2 seconds. You think I've stayed here because I don't have other options? You think I'm too stupid to see how dangerous this is? No, I stayed because I chose to, because this place, this life, is the first thing I've had that's mine. Not handed to me, not promised by some man who changed his mind. Mine. Her voice cracked. And you don't get to tell me to leave now just because things got hard. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. I need you to stop treating me like I'm fragile. I don't think you're fragile. Then stop acting like it. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both too stubborn to back down. Finally, Caleb looked away. I'm sorry, he said. You're right. I shouldn't have said that. No, you shouldn't have. She walked past him toward the house, and he let her go. He'd screwed that up badly. But he didn't know how to explain that the thought of her getting hurt because of him was worse than losing the ranch, worse than losing everything. He'd never been good with words, never knew how to say what he actually meant. He spent the rest of the day clearing debris and checking on the animals. The chickens were spooked but unharmed. The cow was fine. The horse was skittish but calmed down once Caleb spent some time with it. Small mercies. When evening came, he went inside and found Adeline cooking dinner. She didn't look at him, just kept stirring the pot on the stove with mechanical precision. Adeline, don't, she said. I'm not ready to talk about it yet. So he didn't. Just sat down at the table and waited. When she brought him a plate, he thanked her, and she nodded but still wouldn't meet his eyes. They ate in silence. It was the most uncomfortable meal they'd shared since she'd arrived. Caleb hated it, hated that he'd put that distance between them just when they needed to be closest. After dinner, Adeline cleaned up and then went to the bedroom without a word. The door closed, not slammed, but closed firmly. A clear message. Caleb lay down on the floor and stared at the ceiling. He'd really done it this time. The one person who'd stood by him through all of this, and he'd basically told her to leave. What the hell was wrong with him? He didn't sleep that night either. Just lay there thinking about everything that had gone wrong and everything that could still go wrong. And sometime around 3 in the morning, he heard the bedroom door open. Adeline came out, wrapped in a blanket. She didn't say anything, just sat down at the table and looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said, finally. Caleb sat up. "You're sorry? I'm the one who… I know what you were trying to do, and I know it came from a good place. But Caleb, you have to understand something." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My whole life, men have made decisions for me. My father decided I should work instead of going to school. My employer decided I wasn't worth promoting. That man who was supposed to marry me decided I wasn't worth meeting." Her voice shook slightly. "And then I came here, and for the first time, I got to make my own choices. Where I worked, how hard I pushed myself, whether I stayed or left. And it's been terrifying and exhausting, and sometimes I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but they're my choices." Caleb nodded slowly. "I get that, I do. But I'm not finished." She held up a hand. "You're scared. I understand. I'm scared too. But you don't get to take my choices away just because you're afraid of what might happen. If I'm going to stay, and I am, then you have to trust me to know what I'm risking. I do trust you. Then act like it." They looked at each other across the dim room, and Caleb realized this was a turning point. He could either keep trying to protect her by pushing her away, or he could respect her enough to let her fight her own battles beside him. "All right," he said. "No more trying to send you away." "Promise?" "Promise." She nodded, satisfied. Then she stood up and went back to the bedroom, but this time she left the door open. Caleb lay back down, feeling like maybe, just maybe, he hadn't completely destroyed things after all. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Caleb and Adeline worked from sunup to sundown, trying to keep the ranch running without a barn. They built a makeshift shelter for the animals using salvaged wood and canvas. They hauled water, tended crops, and did all the normal work while also preparing for the town meeting. And every day Caleb expected Voss to strike again. But nothing happened. No fires, no dead animals, no threatening notes. Just silence. It made him more nervous than the threats had. "He's waiting," Adeline said one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. "He knows about the meeting. He's planning something." "Probably. You think he'll try to stop us from speaking?" "I think he'll try something, whether that's stopping us or discrediting us or just having his men drag us out, I don't know." Adeline pulled her knees up to her chest. "We should have a backup plan." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but something, in case the sheriff shuts us down before we can present the evidence." Caleb thought about it. "We could have someone else present it, someone Voss doesn't expect." "Who?" "Henderson, maybe. He's respected in the community. Been here longer than most. But Voss knows he's part of this. He'll shut him down too." "Then who?" Adeline was quiet for a moment. Then, "What about the women?" Caleb looked at her. "What?" "The ranchers' wives. Voss and the sheriff won't see them as a threat. They might let them speak when they'd shut down the men." "That's," Caleb trailed off, thinking, "that might actually work. We'd need to convince them, and we'd need to make sure they understand the evidence well enough to present it." "You could do that." "Me?" "You're better at explaining this stuff than I am, and you're a woman. They'll listen to you." Adeline looked uncertain. "I don't know if I have that kind of credibility. Half the town still thinks I'm just some desperate mail-order bride latching onto you." "Then prove them wrong." She smiled slightly. "You make it sound so easy." "Nothing about this is easy. But you're the one who figured out Voss was lying in the first place. You're the one who got the ranchers organized. If anyone can pull this off, it's you." Adeline looked out at the darkening hills. "What if I mess it up? Then we'll figure out something else. But I don't think you will." She nodded, and Caleb could see her turning the idea over in her mind, working through the logistics. This was what she was good at, seeing the angles, planning the details, finding solutions nobody else thought of. Over the next few days, Adeline visited the ranchers' wives one by one. She brought the evidence with her, the forged documents, the certified property surveys, the witness statements they'd collected. And she explained everything clearly and methodically, the way she'd learned to do in the warehouse. Some of the women were skeptical at first, but as they looked at the documents, compared the signatures, saw the discrepancies for themselves, they started to understand. This wasn't just about a few stubborn ranchers refusing to sell. This was about a systematic effort to steal land through fraud and intimidation. By the time the town meeting rolled around, 6 women had agreed to present the evidence if the men were shut down. Caleb didn't know if it would be enough, but it was better than nothing. The day of the meeting, Caleb and Adeline rode into town early. The main hall was already filling up. Seemed like everyone in the territory had come. Merchants, ranchers, families, even some drifters looking for entertainment. And there, near the front, sat Raymond Voss with 3 of his men. He looked calm, confident. That worried Caleb more than anything. The sheriff called the meeting to order and they started with the usual business: water rights disputes, property line disagreements, complaints about livestock theft. It was boring procedural stuff, and the crowd grew restless. Finally, about an hour in, Henderson stood up. "I've got something to bring before this assembly," he said. The sheriff frowned. "This isn't on the agenda." "It needs to be. There's a man in this room who's been using forged documents to steal land from honest ranchers." The crowd murmured. Voss didn't react, just sat there with a slight smile. "That's a serious accusation," the sheriff said. "You got proof?" "We do." "Then present it proper. File a complaint with my office, and I'll investigate." "Your office is compromised," Henderson said flatly. "Everyone here knows you're in Voss's pocket." The room erupted, people shouting, the sheriff banging his gavel, Voss's men standing up like they were ready for a fight. "That's enough," the sheriff yelled. "Henderson, you're out of order. Sit down or I'll have you removed." "You gonna remove all of us?" Henderson gestured to the other ranchers who'd stood up with him. "Because we all have the same story. Voss came to our properties with fake documents, tried to force us to sell, and when we refused, bad things started happening." "Those are lies," Voss said, speaking for the first time. His voice was smooth, practiced. "I've made legitimate offers on properties that have unclear titles. If these men are confused about the legalities, that's not my fault." "Confused?" Tucker shouted. "You poisoned my well." "Prove it," Voss said. "You burned down my barn." "Can you prove that either?" The crowd was getting louder, some people siding with the ranchers, others with Voss. The sheriff kept banging his gavel, but nobody was listening anymore. And that's when Adeline stood up. She didn't shout, didn't make a big gesture, just stood there quietly, waiting for people to notice. And somehow, gradually, the room quieted down. "Mr. Voss," she said, her voice carrying across the hall, "you said these properties have unclear titles. Can you show us the documents that prove that?" Voss looked at her and Caleb saw something flash in his eyes. Recognition. Calculation. "I don't need to prove anything to you, Miss Harper," Voss said. "You're not even a property owner." "No, I'm not. But I know how to read legal documents. I worked in a shipping warehouse for 6 years managing manifests and contracts. So I'm asking you, as someone who understands documentation, show us your proof." "This isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," Adeline interrupted. "You just accuse these ranchers of being confused about legalities. Prove you're not the confused one." The crowd murmured approval. Even people who'd been on Voss's side seemed curious now. Voss's jaw tightened. "Sheriff, I don't have to tolerate this kind of harassment." "She's got a point, though," someone in the crowd called out. "If your documents are legitimate, shouldn't be hard to show them." "Yeah, let's see them." More voices joined in. The sheriff looked uncertain, caught between his loyalty to Voss and the pressure from the crowd. Voss stood up slowly. "Fine. I'll present my documentation. But after I do, I expect a formal apology from everyone who slandered me here today." He pulled out a leather folder and walked to the front of the hall. The crowd pressed forward, trying to see. Voss laid out several documents: surveys, title transfers, boundary maps. Adeline walked up beside him. "May I?" Voss looked like he wanted to refuse, but with everyone watching, he couldn't. "Go ahead." She picked up the first document and studied it. Then the second. Then the third. Caleb watched her face, trying to read her expression, but she gave nothing away. Finally, she set the documents down and turned to face the crowd. "These are well-made forgeries," she said, "but they're still forgeries." Voss's face went red. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Adeline picked up one of the documents. "This survey is dated March 1878, but the territorial seal used here wasn't adopted until January 1879. It's impossible for a document from 78 to have an 79 seal." The crowd murmured. Voss opened his mouth, then closed it. Adeline picked up another document. This title transfer shows 3 signatures from county officials, but 2 of those officials weren't appointed until after the date on this document. They couldn't have signed something before they held office. "You're making that up," Voss said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Am I?" Adeline pulled out a folded paper from her pocket, the certified survey they'd gotten from the land office. "Because this is a certified copy of the original survey for Mr. Mercer's property. Official seal, correct dates, verified by the Territorial Land Office." She held it up next to Voss's document. "Anyone here can see the differences." People crowded closer, comparing the documents. And slowly, the mood in the room shifted. Skepticism turning to anger, murmurs turning to shouts. "He's a fraud! He tried to steal our land! Someone get the territorial marshal!" Voss's men moved toward him, forming a protective circle. Voss himself looked cornered, dangerous. "This is a setup," he said, his voice rising. "She's working with them. They manufactured evidence to discredit me." "The land office manufactured evidence?" Adeline asked calmly. "The territorial government is in on this conspiracy?" "You don't know what you're dealing with," Voss snarled. "I have powerful people behind me. You think exposing some forged documents is going to stop this?" "Maybe not," Adeline said. "But it'll stop you." Voss took a step toward her, and Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. So were Henderson and the other ranchers. The room went deadly silent. "Don't," Caleb said quietly. Voss looked at him, at the rifles pointed in his direction, at the angry crowd surrounding him. For a moment, Caleb thought he might do something stupid, but then Voss's expression went cold and empty. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is," Caleb replied. 2 men in the crowd grabbed Voss's arms, not his hired men, but local ranchers who'd lost patience. The sheriff, seeing which way the wind was blowing, finally stepped in. "Raymond Voss, you're under arrest for fraud and intimidation," he said, not sounding particularly convinced, but saying it anyway. "On whose authority?" Voss demanded. "Mine," said a new voice from the back of the hall. Everyone turned. A man in a dark suit stood in the doorway, a badge gleaming on his chest. Territorial Marshal. "I've been investigating complaints about land fraud in this territory for 3 months, the marshal said, walking forward. "Had my eye on you, Voss. But you were careful, never left enough evidence." He looked at Adeline. "Until now." The marshal took custody of Voss and the room erupted in celebration, people clapping, shouting, shaking hands. The ranchers who'd been too scared to stand against Voss were now claiming they'd never trusted him. The sheriff was trying to explain that he'd been planning to investigate all along. It was chaos. But Caleb only cared about one thing. He pushed through the crowd to Adeline. She was standing near the front, still holding those documents, looking dazed. "You did it," he said. She blinked. "I did." "You stood up there in front of everyone and proved he was lying. You saved the ranch, saved all the ranches." "We saved them," she corrected. "All of us together." "No, you. This was you." She looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. "I was so scared. I thought he'd find a way to twist it, to make people believe him instead of me. But he didn't. No, he didn't." People were crowding around them now, wanting to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her how brave she was. And Adeline handled it all with quiet grace, even though Caleb could see she was overwhelmed. Finally, they managed to extract themselves and walk outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They stood on the steps of the hall, looking out at the town that had mocked Adeline when she first arrived. "They're going to talk about you differently now," Caleb said. "I don't care what they say." "I know. But it matters that you won't be that abandoned mail-order bride anymore. You'll be the woman who took down Voss." Adeline smiled slightly. "I liked being nobody. It was simpler." "Yeah, well, too late now." They walked to where they'd tied the horse. Other ranchers called out to them, promising to help rebuild Caleb's barn, offering supplies, extending invitations to dinners and gatherings. It was overwhelming, but also kind of nice. On the ride home, Adeline was quiet. Caleb let her be. She'd just done something extraordinary, and she needed time to process it. But as they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, she finally spoke. "What happens now?" she asked. "We rebuild. The barn, the routine, everything." "And Voss?" "The marshal will handle him, and whoever was backing him." Caleb glanced at her. "We won, Adeline. It's over." "Is it? What do you mean?" She was quiet for a moment. "I mean, what happens to me? Now that the threat's gone, now that you don't need someone to help you fight anymore, where do I fit?" Caleb pulled the horse to a stop. He turned to look at her, and he saw the fear in her eyes. The same fear she'd had that day when she told him she was working herself to death because she thought he'd send her away. "You think I only kept you around because I needed help fighting Voss?" he asked. "Didn't you?" "No, I kept you around because—" He stopped, trying to find the right words. "Because somewhere between finding you by that wagon and now, this stopped being just my ranch. It became ours. And I don't want to go back to doing this alone." "You're just saying that." "I'm not." He took a breath. "Look, I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings or whatever, but you need to know something. When Voss burned down that barn, the first thing I thought wasn't about the building or the supplies. It was about you, about whether you were safe, about whether I'd gotten you killed by letting you stay." He met her eyes. "And that's when I realized I wasn't just scared of losing the ranch anymore. I was scared of losing you." Adeline stared at him. "Caleb, I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know that you have a place here. Not because I need help, not because I'm being charitable, but because this place isn't home without you in it." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time she let them fall. "You mean that?" "Every word." She laughed, and it was half sob, half relief. "You're an idiot." "Yeah, I know. Yeah. I've been terrified this whole time that once things settled down, you'd realize you didn't actually want me here, that I was just convenient." "Well, you're not convenient, you're stubborn and difficult, and you argue with me constantly." "Thanks. But you're also brave and smart and the best thing that's ever happened to me." He paused. "So if you're planning on leaving, don't. Stay. Build this place with me. Not as someone I'm helping, but as—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish. "As what?" she asked softly. "As my partner. In all of it." Adeline was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, the kind that lit up her whole face. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and knotted since the day he'd found her. Relief. Hope. Something dangerously close to happiness. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. And when they got there, when they dismounted and looked at the charred remains of the barn and the struggling crops and the ramshackle house that barely kept the rain out, it didn't look quite so bleak anymore. It looked like a beginning. That night, they sat outside under the stars, sharing a bottle of whiskey Henderson had given them to celebrate. It burned going down, but in a good way. "We should probably talk about the practical stuff," Adeline said. "Like how we're actually going to rebuild, and what the arrangement is, and—" "Tomorrow," Caleb interrupted. "We can figure all that out tomorrow. Tonight, can we just—" "What?" "Enjoy this. The fact that we won. The fact that we're both still here." Adeline nodded. "All right. Tomorrow." They sat there drinking and talking about nothing important, the stars, the weather, random memories from their pasts. And for the first time since Caleb could remember, the silence between words didn't feel lonely. It felt full. Eventually, Adeline stood up to go inside, but before she reached the door, she turned back. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For finding me that day. For taking me in when you didn't have to. You don't need to thank me for that." "I know, but I wanted to anyway." She went inside and Caleb stayed outside a while longer, looking at the land he'd fought so hard to keep. The land that finally felt like more than just dirt and grass and struggle. It felt like home. And tomorrow, they'd start building the kind of life that was worth all the fighting, together. The morning after the town meeting, Caleb woke to the sound of hammering. He sat up, confused, and walked outside to find Henderson and 6 other ranchers already at work on the barn. They'd brought lumber, nails, and tools, more supplies than Caleb could have afforded in a year. "What's all this?" he asked. Henderson looked up from where he was measuring a beam. "Payment for what you and Miss Harper did yesterday. You don't owe us anything." "The hell we don't. Voss would have taken half the valley if you two hadn't stopped him." Henderson gestured to the other men. "We figured the least we could do is help you rebuild what he burned down." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just point us where you want things and stay out of the way." Adeline came outside then, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. She stopped when she saw all the activity, her eyes going wide. "They're helping," Caleb said. She nodded, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back and walked over to where the men were working. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No, ma'am," one of the ranchers replied. "Thank you." Over the next week, neighbors showed up every day to help. Some brought materials. Others brought food. The women came too, helping Adeline with the garden and the house repairs, teaching her tricks for stretching supplies and preserving food. It was overwhelming. Caleb had spent 8 years on this land mostly alone, and now suddenly there were people everywhere. But it felt right, like this was what a community was supposed to be. The barn went up faster than Caleb had built the original. Better too. The men knew construction tricks he'd never learned, ways to brace the structure so it would survive the brutal Montana winters. By the end of the second week, they had a barn that was actually an improvement over what had burned down. On the last day of construction, Henderson pulled Caleb aside. "Got something to tell you," he said. "What's that?" "Word came from the territorial capital. They arrested 3 businessmen connected to Voss. Railroad investors, just like we thought. Turns out they'd been planning this land grab for over a year." "They going to trial?" "Already did. Territorial judge threw the book at them. Voss got 10 years. The investors got fines and lost their licenses to operate in Montana." Caleb let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "So it's really over. It's really over." Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, Mercer. Both of you." That night, after everyone had left and the new barn stood complete against the darkening sky, Caleb and Adeline sat on the porch watching the sunset. They'd fallen into this routine lately, ending each day together, talking or not talking, just being present. "Feels different now," Adeline said. "What does?" "Everything. The ranch, the town, us." Caleb glanced at her. "Good different or bad different?" "I don't know yet." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "When I first got here, everything was about survival, getting through the day, proving I could handle it. And now that we're not fighting anymore, I'm not sure what comes next." "We build, same as before." "But build what? We've got a barn. We've got crops. We're not starving." She looked at him. "What are we actually doing here, Caleb?" He didn't answer right away. It was a fair question. For years, his only goal had been keeping the land, surviving one more season, not losing what his father had died to give him. But now, with Voss gone and the community rallying around them, survival didn't seem like enough anymore. "I guess we're building a life," he said finally. "The kind worth living." "And what does that look like?" "I don't know. I've never gotten this far before." Adeline laughed, but it was a sad sound. "Me neither." They sat there in the fading light, 2 people who'd survived so much but had no idea how to actually live. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, it felt like possibility. "We'll figure it out," Caleb said. "Together." "You always say that." "Because it's true." She leaned her head against his shoulder then, just for a moment. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact beyond practical necessity, and it made something warm bloom in Caleb's chest. He didn't move, didn't want to break whatever moment this was. "Caleb," she said softly. "Yeah?" "What are we to each other's?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb knew she wasn't asking about the practical arrangement, the work sharing, the cohabitation, the partnership in running the ranch. She was asking about the thing neither of them had been brave enough to name. "I don't know," he admitted. "What do you want us to be?" "I asked you first." "That's not fair. Life's not fair. Answer the question." Caleb took a breath. "I want us to be whatever lets you stay. If that's business partners, fine. If that's friends, I'll take it. If it's... He stopped, not sure he should finish that thought. If it's what? She pressed. If it's more than that, I want that too. But I'm not going to push. You've had enough men trying to decide what you should be. Adeline was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat up and looked at him directly. I care about you, she said. More than I thought I would. More than I planned to. And it scares me. Why? Because everyone I've ever cared about has either left or disappointed me. My parents, my employer, the man who was supposed to marry me. And I keep waiting for you to do the same thing. I won't. You can't promise that. I can. And I am. She shook her head. You don't understand. It's not just about you leaving. It's about me being enough. About being worth staying for, and I don't know if I am. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. Adeline, you saved this ranch. You organized the ranchers. You stood up to Voss in front of the entire valley. You're worth everything. To you, maybe. But what happens when you realize I'm not as strong as you think I am? When I make mistakes or fall apart or can't handle something? Then I'll be there. Same as you've been there for me. Will you, though? Or will you decide I'm too much trouble and send me away like you tried to before? There it was. The wound that hadn't healed. The moment when he'd told her to leave for her own safety, and she'd heard it as rejection. I was wrong to do that, Caleb said. I was scared, and I handled it badly. But I need you to understand something. When I told you to go, it wasn't because I didn't want you here. It was because I wanted you safe more than I wanted you with me. I would rather lose you and know you were alive somewhere than keep you here and watch Voss hurt you. That's not your decision to make. I know. That's what you told me, and you were right. But you need to know where it came from. Not from thinking you were weak, from thinking I'd already lost too many people I cared about, and I couldn't handle losing you too. Adeline's eyes were shining with tears. You really mean that? Every word. She looked at him for a long moment, and Caleb saw her struggling with something. Fear, hope, the desire to believe him fighting against years of learned distrust. Finally she spoke. I want to try. To be more than just partners. But I need you to be patient with me. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. Then we'll figure it out badly together. Caleb smiled. I can live with that. She smiled back, tentative but real. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the space between them felt like connection instead of distance. The next few weeks settled into something resembling normalcy. They worked the ranch together, but there was a new ease to it. They talked more, laughed occasionally, started sharing small touches, a hand on an arm, a shoulder bump, nothing dramatic but everything meaningful. And slowly, carefully, they started planning for a future that went beyond just surviving. One evening, Adeline brought up something that had been on her mind. We should plant apple trees, she said. Caleb looked up from the ledger he'd been studying. Apple trees? In the north pasture, the soil's good there and we've got water now. We could start an orchard. That's a 10-year investment, maybe longer before we see real profit. I know, but isn't that the point? Building something that lasts? Caleb studied her. You planning on being here in 10 years? Are you? I asked you first, she smiled. Yeah, I think I am. Then we'll plant apple trees. They ordered saplings from a nursery in Oregon, along with cherry and plum trees for variety. It cost money they probably shouldn't have spent, but it felt important. Like they were finally admitting this was permanent. When the trees arrived in late September, they spent a week planting them. The work was hard, digging holes, mixing soil, watering each sapling carefully. But there was something satisfying about it. Every tree they planted was a bet on the future, a promise that they'd still be here to see them grow. On the last day of planting, as they stood in the middle of the young orchard looking at rows of fragile saplings, Adeline spoke. My father used to say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Smart man. Not really. He never actually planted any trees, just talked about it. She brushed dirt from her hands. I don't want to be like that. Someone who talks about the future but never builds it. You're not. Look around. This is real. She nodded, but Caleb could see something weighing on her mind. What is it? He asked. I've been thinking about something. About us. Okay, We've been living together for months now, working together, building together. But we're still not—" She trailed off, struggling with the words. "Not what?" "Married," she said quietly. "And people talk. They're not as bad as they were, but they still talk. And I don't care about the gossip, but I care about what happens if something goes wrong." "What do you mean?" "I mean, legally, I have no claim to any of this. If you got hurt or died, I'd have nothing. The ranch would go to your next of kin, whoever that is, and I'd be back where I started." She looked at him. "And before you say that won't happen, we both know life doesn't work that way. We've both lost people. We know how fast things can change." Caleb hadn't thought about it in those terms. He'd been so focused on day-to-day survival that he hadn't considered the legal realities of their arrangement. "You're right," he said. "I should have thought of that." "I'm not asking you to marry me," Adeline said quickly. "I'm just saying we should probably figure out something legal. Maybe I could own part of the ranch as a business partner, or we could draw up some kind of contract. Or we could get married." She blinked. "What? You said yourself we're already living like we're married, working together, building together, planning 10 years out. Why not make it official?" "Because marriage is—" She stopped, and Caleb saw fear flicker across her face. "I came here once before to get married. To a man I didn't know who decided I wasn't worth meeting. What makes this different? Because you know me, and I know you. And we're not doing this because some advertisement said we should, or because we're desperate. We're doing it because we choose each other." Adeline looked at him, and he could see her turning it over in her mind, weighing the risks against the possibilities. "This isn't a proposal," she said finally. "You're just presenting it as a logical option. I'm not romantic enough to make it a proposal." "That's true. But if I was," Caleb continued, "I'd tell you that these past few months with you have been the best of my life. That you make me laugh when I didn't think I remembered how. That you're stronger and smarter and braver than anyone I've ever met. And that I want to spend the rest of my life building something good with you." Adeline's eyes filled with tears. "That sounded pretty romantic." "Did it?" "Yeah." "So what do you say?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. "I say you're an idiot for wanting to marry someone as difficult as me." "Probably." "And I say yes." Caleb felt his heart kick in his chest. "Yeah? Yeah. But we're doing it quietly. No big ceremony. Just us and whoever we need to make it legal." "Deal." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made everything, the drought, the fire, the fight with Voss, all of it, feel worth it. They got married 3 days later in the small church in town with Henderson and his wife as witnesses. The pastor seemed surprised, but pleased. A few townspeople showed up when word got around, and by the end there were maybe 20 people crammed into the small building. Adeline wore the same traveling dress she'd arrived in, cleaned and mended. Caleb wore his only good shirt. There were no flowers, no decorations, no fancy reception, just a simple ceremony where they promised to stand by each other through whatever came next. When the pastor said Caleb could kiss his bride, Caleb hesitated. They'd barely touched beyond practical necessity, and kissing in front of all these people felt presumptuous. But Adeline made the decision for him, leaning up and pressing her lips to his quickly, almost shyly. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't passionate, just a simple kiss that meant more than either of them could say. Afterward, Henderson's wife had organized a small gathering at their ranch. There was food and drink, and people congratulating them, and it was nice. Strange, but nice. Caleb wasn't used to being the center of attention, and he could tell Adeline wasn't either. But they endured it together, and that made it bearable. When they finally got home that night, the house felt different. Not physically. Everything was in the same place. But the meaning had shifted. This wasn't just a place they both happened to live anymore. It was their home, legally, officially, permanently. "I should probably move my things into the bedroom," Caleb said awkwardly. "Now that we're, married." "Yeah." "You can say the word, Caleb. We just stood in front of a pastor and said vows." "I know. It's just taking some getting used to." Adeline smiled. "We don't have to rush anything. I mean, legally we're married. But the rest, we can figure out at our own pace." "You sure?" "I'm sure. I trust you. And I know you'll respect whatever boundaries I need." Caleb nodded, relieved and slightly disappointed at the same time. All right, then I'll keep sleeping out here until you're ready for me not to. Thank you. She went to the bedroom, then paused at the door. Caleb? Yeah? I'm glad I said yes. Me too. She closed the door and Caleb lay down on the floor like he had for months. But this time, it felt different. Not lonely, not temporary, just part of the process of building something good. Fall turned into winter, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of cold months. They spent long days inside, working on repairs and planning for spring. The new barn held up well against the snow. The animals stayed healthy, and the water they'd found kept flowing even when everything else froze. They celebrated Christmas quietly, just the two of them. Adeline made a cake from their precious stores of sugar and flour. Caleb carved her a wooden box for keeping her sewing supplies. They weren't elaborate gifts, but they mattered. On Christmas night, as they sat by the fire, Adeline finally asked him to join her in the bedroom. Not for, she said, then stopped, blushing. I mean, just to sleep. Together. Like married people do. You sure? I'm sure. The floor can't be comfortable, and we're married now. It's silly for you to keep sleeping out here. So Caleb gathered his few belongings and moved into the bedroom. They lay on opposite sides of the bed at first, both stiff and uncomfortable, but eventually they relaxed. And sometime in the night, Caleb woke to find Adeline curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. Just lay there, feeling her warmth, her steady breathing, the solid realness of her beside him. And he thought about how far they'd both come. From strangers to partners to something more. From survival to building. From loneliness to this. It wasn't perfect. They still argued sometimes, still had bad days where the work felt overwhelming or money was tight or the weather turned brutal, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new challenges. The banknote was still due. The ranch needed expansion if they wanted to turn a real profit. And there were rumors of more railroad companies eyeing the valley, though this time with legitimate offers instead of fraud. One afternoon in early March, Caleb and Adeline sat down to review their finances. The numbers weren't good. They'd survived the winter, but barely. They needed to make some decisions about what came next. We could sell some of the land, Adeline suggested, not to speculators, but maybe to one of the neighboring ranchers who needs more pasture. That land's the only thing keeping us viable. Then we need to find another income source, something besides cattle and crops. Caleb thought about it. What about the orchard? Once those trees start producing, we could sell fruit, maybe even make preserves. That's years away. Then what about boarding horses, or offering guide services for people heading west? They went back and forth, throwing out ideas, some practical and some desperate. Finally, Adeline sat back and rubbed her temples. This is harder than fighting Voss, she said. At least with Voss, we knew who the enemy was. Now the enemy is just life, bills, weather, time. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. We'll figure it out, same as everything else. You always say that. Because we always do. She squeezed his hand. What if we don't this time? Then we try something different, but we don't give up. Adeline nodded, but Caleb could see the worry in her eyes. They'd won the dramatic fight, beaten the villain, saved the ranch. But now came the harder part, making the day-to-day actually work. Building a sustainable life instead of just surviving crisis to crisis. That night, Caleb lay awake thinking about their options. They couldn't keep limping along like this. They needed a real plan, a way to grow instead of just maintain. And then it hit him. The next morning, he brought it up to Adeline. What if we helped other people do what we did? He said. What do you mean? Think about it. We found water when everyone said there wasn't any. We organized the ranchers against Voss. We know how to survive out here when everything's against you. What if we taught other people? Taught them what? How to read land, how to find water, how to build community. There are new settlers coming through all the time, and most of them don't know anything about frontier life. They make the same mistakes we did, but they don't survive them. Adeline's eyes lit up. We could offer consulting, help people assess land before they buy it, teach them what to look for. Exactly, and charge for it. That could actually work. They spent the next few weeks developing the idea. Caleb would handle the practical land assessment, soil quality, water sources, structural planning. Adeline would handle the documentation and legal review, making sure people weren't getting sold forged titles or bad deals. Their first client came in April, a young couple from Ohio who'd been about to buy a piece of land site unseen. Caleb and Adeline rode out with them, assessed the property, and discovered the water rights had already been sold to someone else. They saved the couple from losing everything. Word spread. By summer, they had a steady stream of clients. It wasn't making them rich, but it was keeping them afloat. More than that, it was meaningful. They were using everything they'd learned, everything they'd survived, to help others. And slowly, the ranch transformed. They expanded the house to include an office. They hired a young man from town to help with the day-to-day ranch work so they could focus on the consulting business. They even started hosting occasional dinners for clients and neighbors, turning the isolated ranch into a gathering place. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their daily ritual, Adeline spoke. "Remember when I asked what we were building?" she said. "Yeah, I think I know now." "What's that?" "A legacy. Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after. Every person we help, every couple we save from making bad decisions, every community connection we facilitate, it all ripples out." Caleb looked at her. "That's pretty philosophical for someone who used to count shipping manifests." "I've had time to think," she smiled. "And you've been a bad influence, making me care about more than just survival." "Is that a complaint?" "No. It's the opposite." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the hills in shades of gold and orange. The apple trees they'd planted were growing, still young but healthy. The new barn stood solid against the sky, and inside the house there were ledgers full of clients and plans for expansion. "We did it," Adeline said softly. "We actually built something good." "We did," Caleb agreed, "and we're not done yet." She leaned against him and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It was a simple gesture, but it held everything they'd become to each other. Partners, friends, lovers in the quiet way they'd grown into over months of sharing space and life. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah?" "Thank you for not giving up on me. That first day when you found me by the wagon, you could have just pointed me toward town and ridden away. Wouldn't have been right. Most people would have done it anyway." "Then I guess I'm not most people." She laughed. "No, you're definitely not." They stayed there until full dark, watching stars emerge one by one. And when they finally went inside, it was to the home they'd built together, not just the physical structure, but the life within it, the partnership, the purpose, the promise that tomorrow would be worth fighting for. Because that's what they'd learned through all of it. That love wasn't just the dramatic moments, the rescues and the grand gestures and the standing together against villains. It was also the quiet choosing. Day after day, crisis after crisis, season after season, choosing to stay, choosing to build, choosing each other. And that was enough. 3 years passed in the way years do when you're too busy living to count them. The apple trees grew taller, though they still hadn't fruited. The consulting business brought in enough money that Caleb could finally pay off the banknote, and when he made that last payment, he and Adeline celebrated by buying a new stove. One that didn't smoke up the kitchen every time they cooked. Small victories. But they mattered. The ranch had become something neither of them had imagined that first desperate summer. They'd added 2 more hired hands, both young men from families Caleb and Adeline had helped settle in the valley. They'd expanded the house again, this time adding a proper office and a guest room for clients who traveled from far away. And they'd become known throughout the territory as the people to see if you wanted honest advice about land and survival. But success brought its own complications. One morning in early spring, Adeline woke up feeling sick. She barely made it outside before throwing up everything she'd eaten the night before. Caleb found her sitting on the porch steps, pale and shaking. "You all right?" he asked, crouching beside her. "I don't know. I feel terrible." "Maybe something you ate." "Maybe." But she didn't sound convinced. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. By the 4th morning, when Adeline stumbled outside looking green, Caleb was seriously worried. "We're going to see the doctor," he said. "It's probably just a stomach bug." "Then the doctor will tell us that and we'll come home, but I'm not taking chances." They rode into town that afternoon. The doctor was an older man named Patterson who'd been practicing in Montana for 20 years. He examined Adeline while Caleb paced in the waiting area, his mind running through every terrible possibility. When the door finally opened, Adeline came out looking stunned. "What is it?" Caleb asked, standing up quickly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said slowly. "I'm pregnant." Caleb's brain stopped working for a moment. "You're what?" "Pregnant. About 3 months along, the doctor thinks." He stared at her, trying to process the information. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The thought filled him with equal parts joy and terror. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The doctor seems pretty sure." "How do you feel about it?" Adeline sat down on the bench outside the doctor's office. "I don't know. I wasn't planning on this. We never really talked about children." "No, we didn't." Caleb sat beside her. "But do you want this?" She was quiet for a long time. "I think so, but I'm scared." "Of what?" "Everything. Childbirth, being a mother, not being good enough at it." She looked at him. "What if I'm terrible at this?" "You won't be." "You don't know that." "I know you. You're good at everything you put your mind to. You'll be good at this too." Adeline didn't look convinced. "My mother died when I was young. I don't have a lot of memories of what a good mother looks like." "What if I don't know how?" Caleb took her hand. "Then you'll figure it out. Same as everything else. And you won't be doing it alone." She squeezed his hand and he could see tears threatening. "You're not scared." "I'm terrified. But in a good way." "There's a good way to be terrified?" "Yeah. The kind that means something important is happening." Adeline laughed, and it was shaky but real. "When did you become wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just good at pretending." They sat there for a while, letting the news sink in. A baby. Their baby. In 6 months, their life was going to change completely. Again. "We should probably tell Henderson and the others," Adeline said finally. "They'll want to know." "Yeah, but can we just sit here for a minute first? Just us?" She nodded, and they sat in the afternoon sun, holding hands, trying to wrap their minds around the fact that they were about to become parents. When they finally told people, the reaction was overwhelming. Henderson's wife immediately started organizing the Valley women to help prepare. They brought baby clothes, offered advice, promised to be there when the time came. It was touching and terrifying at the same time. As Adeline's pregnancy progressed, Caleb found himself watching her constantly, worried about every little thing. Was she working too hard? Was she eating enough? Was that normal, or should they see the doctor again? "You're hovering," she told him one afternoon when he'd checked on her for the 3rd time in an hour. "I'm being attentive." "You're being annoying." "Same thing." She threw a dishcloth at him. "I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still work. I can still think. I can still function like a normal human being." "I know, I just worry." "Well, stop. You're making me nervous." Caleb tried to back off, but it was hard, especially as summer turned to fall and Adeline grew rounder and slower. She couldn't ride anymore, which meant she couldn't visit clients with him. She had to give up most of the physical ranch work, and he could see it frustrating her, the forced stillness, the loss of independence. One evening in late October, Caleb found her in the orchard, standing among the apple trees that still hadn't fruited, crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She wiped at her tears angrily. "I feel useless. I can't do half the things I used to do. I'm slow and clumsy and tired all the time, and I hate it." "You're growing a person. That's not useless." "It feels useless. You're out there every day working and meeting clients and keeping everything running, and I'm just sitting here getting fat." "You're not fat. You're pregnant." "Same thing." "It's not." Caleb walked over and put his hands on her shoulders. "You're doing the hardest work there is, and you're doing it well. Look at you. You're healthy. The baby's healthy. That's not nothing." "It doesn't feel like enough." "Then let me tell you something. Every morning I wake up and see you still here, still fighting, still refusing to quit no matter how hard things get. That's what keeps me going. You think I'm the strong one? You're the strongest person I've ever met. And you're about to do something I could never do, so don't tell me you're useless." Adeline looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face. "You mean that?" Every word. She leaned against him, and he held her carefully, aware of the growing belly between them. This woman who'd shown up abandoned and desperate 3 years ago was about to become a mother. And he was about to become a father. It still didn't feel real. "Caleb?" she said against his chest. "Yeah? I'm glad it's you. Glad you're the one I'm doing this with." "Me too." They stood there in the orchard as the sun set, holding each other, preparing for the next impossible thing they'd have to face together. The baby came in early November during the first real snowstorm of the season. Adeline's water broke in the middle of the night, and suddenly everything was chaos. Caleb rode through the storm to get Henderson's wife and the midwife, while Adeline tried to stay calm in the house alone. By the time he got back with help, Adeline was in serious labor, gripping the bedpost and breathing through contractions that looked agonizing. The midwife took over immediately, sending Caleb out of the room. "But I want to help," he protested. "You can help by staying out of the way," the midwife said firmly. "Go boil water or something." So Caleb paced in the main room, listening to Adeline cry out from the bedroom, feeling completely helpless. This was worse than facing Voss, worse than any drought or fire or threat, because there was nothing he could do, no way to fight this enemy or make the pain stop. Hours passed, the storm got worse, and the sounds from the bedroom got more desperate. Finally, Henderson's wife came out looking grim. "She's having trouble," she said quietly. "The baby's turned wrong." Caleb felt his blood run cold. "What does that mean?" "It means this is going to take longer, and it's going to be harder on her." "Is she going to be all right?" "I don't know. The midwife's doing everything she can." Caleb wanted to break something, wanted to scream or hit something or do anything that would make this situation different. But all he could do was wait. More hours, more screaming, and then, finally, the sound of a baby crying. Caleb's heart stopped, then started again. Then he was moving toward the bedroom before anyone could stop him. Adeline was on the bed, covered in sweat and blood, looking like she'd been through a war. But she was alive. And in the midwife's arms was a tiny, screaming, impossibly fragile human being. "You have a daughter," the midwife said. A daughter. Caleb moved to the bed and looked down at Adeline. Her eyes were barely open, exhausted beyond anything he'd ever seen. "Is she all right?" Adeline whispered. "She's perfect," the midwife said. 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy lungs. "And Adeline?" Caleb asked. "She'll recover, but she needs rest. A lot of it." The midwife cleaned and wrapped the baby, then placed her in Adeline's arms. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his wife holding their daughter, and he felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his family. These two people were his entire world now. "She looks like you," Adeline said softly, studying the baby's face. "She looks like herself. We need to name her." They'd discussed names over the past few months, but never settled on anything. Now, looking at the tiny person in Adeline's arms, only one name felt right. "Sarah," Caleb said. "After my mother." Adeline nodded. "Sarah Mercer. I like that." The baby, Sarah, let out another cry, and Adeline tried to figure out how to nurse her. It was awkward and messy, and both of them looked exhausted, but they managed. Caleb sat there watching them, feeling something he'd never felt before. Complete. Like every hard thing that had happened, every loss and struggle and fight had been leading to this moment. The first few months with the baby were harder than either of them had anticipated. Sarah cried constantly. She barely slept. And when she did sleep, it was for 20 minutes at a time before she'd wake up screaming again. Adeline was exhausted. Caleb was exhausted. They took turns walking Sarah around the house in the middle of the night, both of them stumbling around like ghosts. The ranch work suffered. The consulting business slowed down. Everything revolved around this tiny tyrant who'd taken over their lives. "This is impossible," Adeline said one morning after a particularly bad night. She was sitting at the table holding Sarah, tears running down her face. "I don't know what I'm doing. I can't make her happy. I'm a terrible mother." "You're not terrible." "Then why won't she stop crying?" "Because she's a baby. That's what they do." "Other babies don't cry this much." "How do you know?" "I don't, but it feels like they don't." Caleb took Sarah from her arms. "Go sleep. I'll handle this for a while." "You need to work." "Work can wait. Sleep." Adeline was too tired to argue. She stumbled to the bedroom and collapsed. Caleb walked Sarah around the house, bouncing her gently, trying everything he could think of to calm her down. Nothing worked. She just kept crying. Finally, in desperation, he took her outside. The cold air hit them both, and Sarah stopped crying. Just like that. Stopped mid-wail and looked around with wide, curious eyes. "Well, hell," Caleb muttered. "That's all it took?" He walked around the property with her, showing her the barn, the animals, the orchard. She stared at everything with that intense baby focus, completely silent for the first time in what felt like days. When he brought her back inside an hour later, Adeline was awake again. "How did you get her to stop?" she asked. "Took her outside. She likes the cold air, I guess." "Seriously?" "Seriously." Adeline laughed, and it turned into a sob. "We're terrible at this." "No, we're just learning. Same as everything else." They got better at it, slowly. They learned Sarah's rhythms, her likes and dislikes. They figured out how to function on 3 hours of sleep, and gradually, life found a new normal. By spring, Sarah was sleeping through most nights. She was smiling now, making sounds that weren't just crying. And both Caleb and Adeline felt like maybe they'd survive parenthood after all. One afternoon, Caleb came back from checking the north pasture to find Adeline in the orchard with Sarah. She'd laid out a blanket, and they were sitting in the shade of the apple trees, which, Caleb noticed for the first time, had blossoms on them. "They're blooming," he said, surprised. Adeline looked up and smiled. "I noticed this morning. Took them long enough." 4 years. Worth the wait, though. Caleb sat down beside them. Sarah immediately reached for him with her chubby hands, and he picked her up. She was getting bigger, more solid, more like a real person instead of a fragile thing that might break if he held her wrong. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Adeline asked. "When you found me by the wagon?" "Sometimes." "What do you think would have happened if you'd just ridden past?" Caleb considered it. "I'd probably still be out here alone, barely surviving. No consulting business, no expanded ranch, no—" He looked down at Sarah. "None of this." "And I'd probably be dead," Adeline said quietly. "Or worse." "Don't think about that." "I'm not. I'm just grateful. For all of it, even the hard parts." She looked at him. "Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." Caleb knew what she meant. The drought had taught them resilience. Voss had taught them to fight. The barn burning had taught them community. And Sarah had taught them that sometimes the hardest things were also the most worthwhile. "We should throw a party," Adeline said suddenly. "For what?" "For the orchard blooming. For making it through winter. For surviving 4 years of this." She gestured around at the ranch. "For still being here. You want to celebrate still being alive? Why not? Plenty of people don't make it. We did. That's worth celebrating." So they planned a gathering. Invited the ranchers who'd helped them, the families they'd consulted for, friends from town. And on a warm day in late May, with the apple trees in full bloom and Sarah crawling around on a blanket, they hosted the biggest party the Mercer Ranch had ever seen. People brought food and drink. Someone brought a fiddle and played music. Kids ran around chasing each other while adults talked and laughed. And Caleb stood on the porch watching it all, feeling something close to contentment. Henderson came up beside him, holding a drink. "You done good, Mercer," he said. "We got lucky." "Luck's part of it, but the rest is work. You and your wife, you didn't just survive out here, you built something." Caleb looked at Adeline, who was sitting with a group of women, Sarah on her lap. She was laughing at something someone said, and she looked happy. Actually happy, not just managing or coping, but genuinely content with her life. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I guess we did." As evening came and the party wound down, people started leaving. They thanked Caleb and Adeline, promised to visit again soon, and headed home. Finally, it was just the 3 of them again, Caleb, Adeline, and Sarah. They sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, the same view they'd watched dozens of times before. But it felt different now, richer, fuller. "You know what I realized today?" Adeline said. "What's that?" "This place stopped being just yours a long time ago. It's ours now, mine and yours and Sarah's. It's home." Caleb nodded. She was right. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just his father's land that he was trying not to lose. It had become something they'd built together, A home, a business, a community, a life. I never thanked you properly, Adeline continued, for taking me in that first day, for not sending me away. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. Caleb felt his throat tighten. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you showed up, going through the motions. You made me start actually living again. Sarah made a noise, and they both looked down at her. She was almost asleep, her eyes drooping, one hand gripping Adeline's finger. What do you think her life will be like? Adeline asked softly. Better than ours, Caleb said. We'll make sure of it. How? By teaching her everything we know. About the land. About surviving. About not giving up even when things look impossible. And about love, Adeline added. About choosing the people who matter and fighting for them. Yeah, that too. They sat there until full dark, holding their daughter, watching the stars come out one by one. And Caleb thought about how strange life was. How you could lose everything and find something better. How the worst moments could lead to the best ones. How two strangers could become a family. Years passed. The apple trees fruited, and their first harvest brought in enough money to expand the orchard. The consulting business kept growing. They hired an assistant to handle scheduling so Caleb and Adeline could spend more time with Sarah and the ranch. And slowly, the Mercer place became known throughout Montana Territory as a success story. The kind of place other settlers pointed to as proof that it was possible to make it out here. But success hadn't made them soft. They still worked hard, still faced droughts and harsh winters, and all the challenges that came with frontier life. The difference was they faced them together, as partners, as equals, as people who'd chosen each other every single day. Sarah grew into a fierce, curious child who loved the land as much as her parents did. She learned to ride before she could read, helped in the orchard as soon as she was tall enough to reach the low branches, and followed Caleb around asking endless questions about everything. Why do the trees grow slower up there? She asked one afternoon, pointing at the hills. Less water, Caleb explained. Plants need water to grow, and the higher up you go, the drier it gets. So we should plant trees where the water is? Exactly. That's what Mama did, right? Found the water so we could plant? That's right. Sarah thought about this for a moment. Mama's smart. The smartest person I know. Smarter than you? Way smarter. Sarah nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she ran off to investigate something else, leaving Caleb smiling after her. When Sarah was 6, Adeline found out she was pregnant again. This time they were more prepared, less terrified, though still plenty nervous. The second baby, a boy they named Thomas after Adeline's father, came easier than Sarah had, and suddenly they were a family of 4, and the house that had once felt too big for one person now felt almost too small. They expanded again, added more rooms, hired more help, and kept building. One evening, when Thomas was about a year old and Sarah was helping Adeline with dinner, Caleb found himself alone in the orchard. The trees were mature now, producing fruit every season. The branches were thick and strong, casting deep shadows in the fading light. He thought about the day they'd planted these trees, how uncertain everything had felt, how they'd been betting on a future they couldn't guarantee. And now here they were, standing in the middle of that future, watching it bear fruit literally and figuratively. Footsteps behind him. Adeline appeared, carrying Thomas on her hip. There you are, she said. Sarah wants to know if she can have an extra piece of cake after dinner. Tell her she can have 2 pieces if she finishes her vegetables. Adeline smiled. You're too soft on her. Someone has to be. She came to stand beside him, and they looked out at the orchard together. Remember when we planted these? She asked. I was just thinking about that. Did you imagine we'd end up here? 2 kids, successful business, actually happy? No, I didn't let myself imagine that far ahead. Me neither. I was too busy just trying to survive each day. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Adeline spoke again. You know what I think? What? I think we were both broken when we found each other. You from losing everyone you loved, me from never being wanted in the first place, and somehow we put each other back together. Caleb considered this. Maybe. Or maybe we were never really broken, just waiting for someone who could see us properly. That's more poetic than I expected from you. I'm full of surprises. Thomas started fussing, and Adeline bounced him gently. We should get back. Sarah's probably eating cake straight from the pan by now. They walked back to the house together, and through the windows, Caleb could see Sarah at the table, doing exactly what Adeline had predicted. He laughed, and it felt good. Easy. Like something he'd been doing his whole life instead of something he'd almost forgotten how to do. That night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, Caleb and Adeline sat on the porch one more time. It was their ritual. Had been for years. No matter how busy the day got, they always found time for this, sitting together, watching the sunset, being present with each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Coming here? Staying?" "No, never." Adeline looked at him. "Do you? Bringing you home that first day? Hell no. Best decision I ever made. Even though I've been difficult and stubborn and argued with you about everything? Especially because of that." He took her hand. "You made me better. Made me want to be better, and you gave me a family. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." Adeline leaned her head on his shoulder. "We gave each other a family, and that's what makes it work." They sat there as darkness fell, two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. And Caleb thought about all the moments that had led them here. The good ones and the terrible ones. The victories and the losses, the fights and the forgiveness. It hadn't been perfect. They'd made mistakes. They'd hurt each other sometimes. They'd struggled and failed and had to start over more times than he could count. But they'd done it together. And that had made all the difference. Years later, when Sarah was grown and running the consulting business herself, when Thomas had taken over most of the ranch operations, when Caleb and Adeline were older and slower and watching grandchildren play in the orchard they'd planted decades before, people would ask them for advice. "How did you make it work?" they'd ask. "How did you build all this?" And Adeline would always give the same answer. "We didn't quit. We faced every problem head on. We asked for help when we needed it, and we chose each other every single day. That's all. There's no secret." But Caleb knew there was more to it than that. The real secret was understanding that love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice, a practice, a commitment you renewed constantly through actions, not just words. It was finding someone by a broken wagon and deciding to help instead of walking away. It was standing together against threats you couldn't face alone. It was rebuilding after loss instead of giving up. It was planting trees you might not live to see bear fruit because you believed in a future worth building. It was all the small moments between the big ones, the morning coffee, the shared work, the quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land you'd fought to keep. That was love, real love, the kind that survived droughts and fires and enemies and time itself. And as Caleb sat there in his old age, holding Adeline's weathered hand, watching their grandchildren run through the orchard that had started as nothing more than hope and determination, he understood something fundamental. They hadn't just survived the frontier. They'd conquered it. Not through force or luck or any single dramatic moment, but through the slow, steady work of building something good together. Day after day, year after year, choice after choice. And in the end, that was the only victory that really mattered. The sun set over the Montana hills one more time, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The apple trees swayed in the evening breeze, their branches heavy with fruit. And somewhere in the house behind them, their family, the one they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and faith in each other, was preparing dinner. Life was good. Not perfect, but good. And that was more than enough. That was everything.